What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and I want to welcome you to Subclass School, the series where I break down everything you need to know about every subclass in Destiny 2. This is going to be a generic intro for all the videos going forward, so if you have seen some other videos in this series, feel free to skip ahead. I just want to mention a few disclaimers before we get started. For my testing, I didn't use any exotics that will impact an aspect or fragment in any way. Like, I may use Claws of Ahamkaras for showing a melee interaction because it helps me test more efficiently, or Vesper of Radius to show something on a subclass that revolves around rifts or class abilities. However, I would never use Vesper if I was using a fragment that gives class ability energy, because I want to show that fragment on its own merit. Same goes for mods. I may use Bomber or something to reduce a grenade cooldown, but I will never use that mod if what I am testing affects your grenade cooldown. Because again, these videos are designed to show you how each thing works on an individual level, by itself. So I don't want any interference from mods in these tests. And that being said, in much of the testing, I didn't even use more than one fragment. I would often have only one aspect equipped that wouldn't interfere with my testing, and then just the fragment that I am testing. Another thing, a huge shout out to the people at the Destiny Data Compendium. This is a spreadsheet that people in the community have created with all the info you could ever need on Destiny 2. It is linked in the description of every single one of my videos, so check them out. The spreadsheet is an amazing resource and an inspiration for me to take the info that they have gathered and put it into video form. So while I did do a ton of the testing myself, I also relied on the info from the Compendium. So far, I have only really found one discrepancy between my tests and the info that they have, and I rely on them for certain values that I do not know how to test. Like Whisper of Hedrons, which gives stability and aim assist, I rely on their numbers, or most things regarding damage resistance. So again, much of this is my own testing, but I certainly use some of the data that they have sourced too, and I use their info to cross-reference my findings. Lastly, these videos took a ton of time and effort to produce, hours and hours of testing, screenshotting every aspect and fragment and piece of info from the Compendium, editing the videos, trying to show as much info as I can without overdoing it, and showing every scenario, which would balloon the videos to be way too long. So if I say something reduces your rift cooldown by 30 seconds, you just have to believe me. I'm not going to show a clip of a 1 minute rift and then a 1 minute and 30 second rift cooldown. You have to just trust that I did the testing and prove this to be true. I want them to be in-depth and informative, but at the same time, not try to completely overwhelm the viewer with information and make it super boring to watch. These were entirely created by me and me alone. Even the PvP testing, I hopped on a friend's account on my laptop and would test what I needed to test. So for the hundreds and hundreds of hours I poured into these videos, a like and subscription would go a long way. I would love to hit 50,000 subs before the final shape, so if you could do me a solid and hit that like and subscribe button, it would mean the world to me. Now let's jump into the content. So for today's video, we'll be looking at the Stasis Fragments, of which there are 14. We'll just go through each of them one by one in alphabetical order, meaning we will start with Whisper of Bonds. This fragment states defeating frozen targets generates an orb of power. But much like Ember of Wonder, there is of course a 10-second cooldown before you can make another orb. This is done for the sake of balance, as you could make a crap ton of orbs otherwise. One important thing to note is that if you kill the enemy outright, like from a Penumbral Blast melee, before it has a chance to actually be frozen, then it won't create an orb of power. But that is pretty much all there is to know with this fragment. It's pretty straightforward. It also gives you -10 to your intellect stat. Moving on, we have Whisper of Chains. This states that while you are near frozen targets or a friendly stasis crystal, you take reduced damage from targets. So here is one of those cases where I rely on the Destiny Data Compendium. They state that it gives you 40% damage resistance and only 5% in PvP. It also gives you +10 to your recovery stat. So this could be nice for survivability and higher end content. Next we have Whisper of Conduction. This one is very straightforward. It states nearby stasis shards track to your position. It gives +10 to resilience and intellect. So if you have a build based around making shards, then this is very nice as you don't have to run around and collect them. The Compendium states that they track when you are within 15 meters of them, which is a pretty decent distance. So this is definitely a quality of life fragment. Next we have Whisper of Durance. Slows from your abilities last longer. For those abilities that linger, their duration will increase. Gives +10 to strength. So unlike Ember of Ashes, which generally increases Scorch by 1.5 times or 50%, this one is on a case-by-case basis. So throughout the rest of the subclass school, when you see the Compendium info, this will have a small plus sign that indicates how much longer it will last with this fragment equipped. So for a Duskfield grenade, I found that at base it lasts for 7 seconds, and with Durance it lasts for 10. A Bleakwatcher turret lasts for 25 seconds at base, but with Durance it lasts for 30. This is a very nice fragment for any build that's based around slow, so it's really good on something like a Renewal Grasps Hunter. Next is Whisper of Fissures. Increases the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy a stasis crystal or defeat a frozen target. So this one is extremely difficult to measure because the damage of a crystal explosion will depend on the enemy's proximity to it, and this is hard to do consistently. So the Destiny Data Compendium says shattering enemies or crystals deals an additional damage instance, dealing up to 25 damage in a 10-meter radius. So even this is kind of confusing. So first, let me say that if you have a build that is based around shattering stasis crystals, you should definitely use this, especially on something like a Behemoth Titan who is all about making crystals. But to visually show the damage increase is quite difficult, but this clip shows it quite well. So I freeze Carl and shatter the ice, and it deals 19,880 damage from the sniper shot and 11,392 from the shatter, and then an additional 1424 damage. Then I take Fissures off and do the same thing, and I do not get the 1424 damage number, but the others stay the same. So we deal an extra 12.5% damage based off the shatter damage, which is what the Compendium states. As for the extra AoE of the shatters, like I said, it's quite hard to measure, but again, it's very good to run if you have a build based around shattering crystals. Moving on, we have Whisper of Fractures. This states your melee energy recharges faster when you are near 2 or more targets, gives -10 to discipline. So the Compendium says that you must be within 15 meters of 2 or more enemies. So you will get 2.5% melee energy every second if you're around 2 enemies, and 5% per second if you're around 3 or more. The melee gains you get back from this fragment are quite impressive. Like 5% per second would get your melee back in 20 seconds without any passive cooldown. That's quite strong. That being said, most stasis melees are not that good, but it is a strong fragment for what it does. Next is Whisper of Hedrons. This states dramatically increases weapon stability, weapon aim assist, weapon airborne effectiveness, mobility, resilience, and recovery after freezing a target with stasis. And the Compendium gives us the data. It grants us a stat boost for 11 seconds every time we freeze an enemy. I put this on with Osmiomancy Cold Snaps, and every time the Cold Snap froze a new enemy, the timer would reset. It says it gives you plus 60 to mobility, resilience, and recovery. So this thing is amazing for filling out your stats as long as you are always freezing stuff. But if you are running low resilience in a GM, you may not want to rely on this because it's quite unpredictable. It also boosts those stats, which helps your cooldown on certain characters. So on Warlock, you could run 40 recovery, but if you are always getting freezes off, you would effectively always have 100 recovery, so your Rift cooldown would only be 48 seconds instead of 75 seconds, provided you're able to keep Hedrons active pretty much the whole time. This is very powerful. Same goes for a Hunter dodge. You could run 40 mobility and you would have close to 100 if you keep Hedrons up a lot, and also for your Titan Barricade. As for other stats, it gives you 30 stability, 15 aim assist, and 20 airborne effectiveness. So overall, a pretty good fragment depending on your build. It gives a lot of benefits. Next is Whisper of Hunger. This states increases the melee energy gained from picking up stasis shards. If you watch my stasis verbs breakdown, you will know these give 10% melee energy from a small shard and 50% from a large shard. Well, this takes it to 17.5% energy for a small, and 75% for a large. This is actually really strong. But again, the problem is that stasis melees just aren't that good. But again, the fragment itself is very good at what it does. You get super huge melee gains. As a result, Bungie made it so this gives -20 to your strength stat, but the gains you get from picking up shards way more than offset this. Next is Whisper of Impetus. This gives +10 to resilience and states damaging targets with a stasis melee reloads your stowed weapons and grants you a temporary boost to weapon ready speed. In the background gameplay, you can see me on a hunter with 6 coyote and marksman's dodge, and I dump 14 rockets in about 14 seconds. This fragment is great on hunter because they get 2 withering blade melees, meaning they can use this fragment to reload their weapons quite easily. The downside is, much like Threat of Ascent or Demolitionist, there is a cooldown. So when you proc it, you get Nimble Arsenal on a 5-second timer, but if you try to re-proc it before the timer runs out, it doesn't work. So you have to be aware of that. But it is great for damage rotations as it also gives increased handling. Plus 40 to the handling stat of all your weapons, so it's great for DPS swap rotations. And it reloads all your weapons, not just your equipped one. So you could dump like a full 4th Horseman with the right setup on a Hunter. But even if you were just using it in a day-to-day build, it's still nice to have. Sometimes you're being rushed by enemies in a GM and all your weapons aren't reloaded. Well, you can just chuck out a melee and boom, everything is reloaded and ready to go. So it's not a bad fragment at all. Next is Whisper of Refraction. Defeating slowed or frozen targets grants you class ability energy. So this is based on the tier of enemy defeated. You can see all the values on screen now. I was very impressed with this fragment. I got 4 rifts back in about a minute and I was not even fully optimized for this. If you were running this on a Bleakwatcher Warlock, you could have your rift up almost constantly. But it can work on any character. So it's great for Hunter for getting your dodge back, and for Titan for getting barricades as well. Which is great on something like a Cadmus Ridge Lancecap Titan, as you could have a rally barricade up basically all the time. Or run it with Hoarfrost Z for a ton of stasis barricades. Again, a very good fragment at what it does, but you really need to be built around using your class ability to get the most use out of it. Whisper of Rending is next. Primary ammo weapons do increased damage to stasis crystals and frozen targets. So again, if you watch the Stasis Verbs video, you will know primary weapons do 5% less damage to frozen combatants. But with Whisper of Rending, this is increased by 50%. So my auto rifle normally hits for 15-19 damage when a target is frozen, and now it hits for 22-78 damage. So this is a very powerful fragment. And it also works in PvP. My auto rifle hits for 23 to the body and 41 to the head. Then when frozen, it only hits for 9 to the body and 17 to the head. Drastically less damage. But when we put on Whisper of Rending, it hits for 14 to the body and 25 to the head. Because of rounding, this works out to a 50% damage increase, which is the same as PvE. So that is great to know and something you'll definitely want to consider if you are running Stasis in PvP. Also, big shout out to my buddy Baker for helping me test that. I also want to point out a special interaction because I know people have asked if it stacks. So here's Verglas Curve. Nowhere on the weapon does it say it does more damage to frozen targets, but it does. So at base on Carl, we hit for 11,724 damage. Then when he is frozen, we hit for 16,707. This is a 42.5% damage increase. But then we throw on Whisper of Rending, and now we hit for 25,060 damage. This is a 50% damage increase from the first damage increase, so they stack multiplicatively, meaning the total damage increase is 2.1375x, or 114% more damage. So if you're running this bow, then I highly recommend running Whisper of Rending. It also gets a quicker draw time when you freeze enemies. It's just a great bow, and it's awesome with this fragment. And I'm not even done. It also takes less shots to break a crystal with this fragment. So without Rending, it takes me 4 shots to break a small crystal, 5 to break a medium crystal, and 6 to break a large crystal. With Whisper of Rending, it only takes 2 shots from this auto rifle to break any of these crystals. So that is pretty great. And this buff also works for Revision 0 and Vex Mythoclast in their alternate fire modes because they are still primary damage weapons. So something like Wishender, which hits very hard too, is great with this. And I want to point out one more amazing weapon that this works with, and that is Quicksilver Storm. So at base, the grenade hits for 72,000 damage, and then 68,000 when frozen, but we do get some shatter damage, so the total is like 80,000. But then we put on Whisper of Rending, and it does a whopping 102,786 damage, plus the shatter damage to push it up to like 115,000. That is absurd damage for any weapon, let alone a primary. So yeah, depending on your weapon loadout, this fragment can be ridiculous. Alright, that was a long one, but I wanted to really showcase how powerful that fragment can be in the right situation. The next fragment is Whisper of Rime, which states collecting a stasis shard grants a small amount of overshield, which falls off after 10 seconds. Collecting additional shards adds to the overshield and refreshes the timer. So you need to collect 10 small shards to get a full overshield. Each small shard gives 5 HP, so it is a 50 HP overshield. And large shards will give about 35 HP back. If you don't have full health, then these will replenish your health bar instead. And according to the Compendium, the overshield gives 50% damage resistance as well. So here's a clip of combining Whisper of Rime and Whisper of Chains, and you can see it takes Carl quite a while to kill us with this combo. Whisper of Shards states shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increases the duration of this benefit. So each crystal you destroy gives you 5 seconds of improved ability regeneration, and this can go up to 10 seconds. And while this timer is active, you get a 500% increase to your base grenade regen rate. This is actually 6 and 11 seconds if you want to get technical, because the timer lingers for 1 second on 0. Regardless, the improved ability regen rate is substantial to say the least. I love running this fragment on my Osmiomancy Bleakwatcher build. We can use Vergloss Curve to make crystals and then break those crystals for great AoE ad clear and huge grenade uptime. This is just a great fragment. And that brings us to the final fragment, Whisper of Torment. This one is simple. You gain grenade energy each time you take damage from targets, so there's a 1 second cooldown between grenade energy gains. When you take damage, you get a 5% bump to your grenade energy, and it's a 10% bump if you are in critical health. So this mod is certainly very strong, but it's also quite risky because ideally you do not want to be taking a bunch of damage. But taking damage is often inevitable, so getting little chunks of grenade energy every time you do is a nice passive buff. And that is going to do it for the Stasis Fragments. I learned a lot when I was doing the testing for these, and I hope you did too. If you did, then leaving a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. And if you are still watching, then I already appreciate you for watching to the end. See you in the next subclass school on Stasis Aspects. Take care.